And ever-present God. As usual, I like to start with a little bit of a Bible study, and I look back at the book of Genesis, and I'm pretty sure that if you look at your reading on page 4, you will see that Jacob left Beersheba, and I'm pretty sure that Sheba does not mean tent. Tent. And you also are aware that in those days that the dream, when people were dreaming, that for human beings was understood to be sort of an access point between humanity and God. That when a person dreamed, that there were no boundaries or barriers between God and the human being. And so this dream that Jacob has is a reflection of that. And as he awoke from that, at the bottom of page 4, you have him say, "This is none other than the house of God," which is actually a translation of what he names it, Beit El. Bethel. Beit El means the house of God. Beit Lahem, the house of God, and I guess I don't know what Hem means. But these are places where God dwells. It's an important factor. I look at Psalm 139, and I love Psalm 139 because it reflects the kind of characteristic of God which is important to me. It's important to me to know that God knows me. I want that to be important to you, that God understands you. God understands you in your darkness, and God understands you in your light. There are no secrets in you that God does not know. God creates you every day, and God understands the nature of that creation, the person that you are. That's significant. And then I also love the reading from Paul. I love the reading from Paul when he says, "I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us." About to be revealed to us. I have, over the past couple of weeks, kind of been emotionally jerked from pillar to post. That is the nature of this profession. But I suspect that you have also. The question that comes to my mind is, that comes to mind for this morning is, how do you like this world we're living in right now? How do you like that world? How do you like this world that we're living in right now? I think about, and I've talked about it before, I talk about this word synergism. The word synergism, where we bind all of our efforts together and we get something greater than the sum of its parts. And when we bind our hearts together in the Christian or otherwise God-supportive gestures, when we bind our hearts and actions together in a way which enriches the world and embellishes the creation as God would have it, then that is a good which is greater than the sum of its parts. And if we believe this, if we understand this to be true, then we also need to understand, I believe, that the other side of that is true. That when people bind themselves together for the purpose of creating morally repugnant actions in this world, then their actions become greater than the sum of their parts. And we move from what I consider the lesser definition of bad into the larger definition of evil. And it is true that evil exists in this world. As I was thinking about this sermon, some of you that follow Stephanie's postings on Facebook, you all will know perhaps that we have a new doggie. She's new to us. She's 6 years old. She was wild. She was captured from the living wild and was brought into the human world, and At some point in her 6 years of life, someone beat her. And beat her several times, I'm guessing, because she's timid. She's learning to love us now and be with us, but she's timid. The song that I've been singing over the last few weeks in my mind is, and sometimes out loud, is, "No one's gonna hurt you, not while I'm around." I have that ability. I have that ability now to provide for her some measure of safety in our house. But I will confess to you, because God already knows it, the God that gave us through the psalmist, the God that understands me at my darkest and my lightest, understands that I would like to take the leash, or whatever it was that the person beat this dog with. I would like to find that person, and I would like to beat that person. I would like to do that. My heart tells me that somehow or another, there would be some satisfaction if I took that leash and I chased this person slowly around the room, beating that person and saying to that person, "How does that feel? How does that feel?" And of course, the story goes on from there, that because I'm wearing plastic in my shirt, I'm supposed to set a better example than that. But God understands the nature of who I am, and understands the nature of who you are. Because you see, and I'm going to talk a little bit now about that equal sign we see in our arithmetic. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Well, how does my beating whoever beat this dog, how does that equal what that person did to the dog? How can I undo what was done to that dog by beating that person? How does 3, the deaths of 3 Israeli children, equal the burning death of 1 Palestinian child? How does that equal? Where does that come from? How does the shooting down of one airliner with 298 men, women, and children, how does that equal the oops that has come from that? How does the knowledge that this was some kind of a mistake, how does that bring equilibrium back to the world? How does that work? How are we meant to understand that? This is deeply troubling. Deeply troubling, because, you see, whoever fired that missile on purpose. That was let's pull the trigger. You don't just, it's not like, you take the safety off and you aim it at whatever you're aiming at and you shoot. It's not like that with a missile. You got to set this thing up. You got to park it. You got to put it in place. You got to get all the computer systems up and working, and then you have to let it go. Good and evil. You see, part of this comes from the fact that one of the biggest arguments against the presence of God on earth, believe it or not, was the presence of Hitler on earth. That's one of the biggest arguments that people have about the presence and the reality and existence of God. That's one of the biggest arguments. If there is a God, how can this have occurred? It's a very good question. It's a very good question. You see, because what people lose sight of is that all of those horrible systems that were designed during the Nazi realm, all of those horrible systems that were designed, the word is design. They were designed. A human being sat in a conference room and said, we need to have this kind of a fabrication of a building or a system, Okay, now hand these ideas over to your draftsmen, and your draftsmen have to draw the draftings of it. They have to draw the pictures of it, and then you hand it to a contractor who builds it. And then you suddenly have evil, which is greater than the sum of its parts. Suddenly you have evil greater than the sum of its parts. So how do we do this? What is this about? Well, there we finally get to the scripture for today. We finally get to the scripture for today. This thing about the weeds. We finally get to the scripture for today. The first inclination that most of us have is that well, I want to be sown by the good sower. And yes, all of us do. I don't personally, and I have never met personally anyone who wanted to be sown by the devil. I've never met personally anyone that wants to do that or be there. It's not, in this instance, it's not about that. But what it is about is recognizing the sovereignty of God. It is recognizing the sovereignty of God. That there are things in this world that we have to turn over to God. I can't find that person and chase him around the room and beat the fill in the blank out of him. I cannot do that. And I trust that I would not do that. I trust that my sense of right and wrong would intervene. But there feels like to me sometimes that there are things that happen which are larger than what I can cope with. How do you like this world we live in? And what we have here is the Son of Man. The Son of Man will send his angels. And they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire. All of those persons in this world who are purposefully hurting other persons, all of those things in this world that we cannot do anything about, that we think we cannot do anything about, we are promised right here, just as those persons were promised 2,000 years ago, that it's in God's hands. We are to recognize that God understands us at our deepest level. And we are to trust that God will do those things which we cannot do. And that is my prayer. That is my prayer. When I sleep at night, I want to put my head on the pillow of Beit El, the house of God. When I awake in the morning, I want to put my feet on the path toward Beit El, the house of God. When I come here on Sunday morning, I want to join with you, and together we journey in our various ways toward Beit El. And when all of the news that we seem to hear is bad news, let us remember that this whole cosmos is Beit El. It is the house of God, and God is in control. God will handle those things which we cannot. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place. He comes to cleanse and heal, to minister His grace. No work too hard for Him. In faith receive from Him. Be still, for the